Hey everybody, my name is Dowden, and in this video we're going to be looking at how we can produce organic and deep house. We're producing in the style of Tim Green, Brian Sid, Hermanez, Volen Sentir, that really tight sounding percussion, the melodies that are really beautiful and atmospheric, but really groovy tracks that are great for day vibes and late vibes and night vibes. This style of music mainly revolves around three main elements. The first being a groovy and a driving bass line that isn't too aggressive. Then we have really tight percussion that's super groovy and sometimes intricate. And to top it all off, we have really beautiful melodies that just tie in the whole atmosphere of the track. A big portion of the video is dedicated to the percussive elements of the track because I find them very important and they can really elevate the track. There's a lot of tips and tricks that I hope that you're going to learn from this video and take it into your own productions. So without further ado, let's go and produce some organic house. Okay, so let's just dive into it. So first I'm going to explain how I'm going to do this. I have my current project set up here with the samples that I'm going to be using inside of this template file. I've chosen these samples already. I know they're going to work with the project. And then I have laid out a layout of my template of what kind of goes into each section of the track to kind of help me stay organized. And when I give you the download then you can also stay organized and you kind of can put in your own things here to make it your own track. And then I have some samples that I have left in here because I want to use them. I remember how I made them, but I didn't want to risk not getting the exact same sound because I do really like how they sound. So I'll show you how to make those sounds, but maybe we won't get the exact same ones. So I'll start with my kick drum. The track is going to be in D minor. And then I have these two layers with my kick. I have the original kick, really short, really punchy. With songs like this, you don't want too much overpowering sub. The organic and deep house vibes are usually not too aggressive, so you don't want a kick that's overpowering and overbearing, but enough sub that it's going to carry through the track on a big system. But there wasn't much high end to this, so I added a second layer, and I faded out really quickly, and I cut everything past this, and then I EQ'd out the low end. The reason I did this is so that I don't accidentally get any of the sub frequencies from the sample, and I just want that initial click. And then maybe I'll compress these together, actually. I'm going to put no attack, fair ratio. I'm putting no attack because I don't want any of the original transients to get through. I want to just compress maybe 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction here. Just grabbing anything that might be peeking through. Just kind of gluing it together a little bit. Next, I'm going to do the bass line. So I'm going to grab a serum patch, or I can just grab wavetable, keep it simple, and drag and drop that in. Sub, so we'll do the sine wave with maybe a little bit of the triangle wave kind of coming through to give it a bit of harmonic content. A little bit less. We're gonna put a filter on that. No resonance, and put this at 24. And let's grab, I'm just gonna grab a span, it's a spectrum analyzer, and I like to put that on my master and just take a look at what we got going on. So you can see as I raise that, you're getting a little bit of harmonic content there. And I want to bring in a second oscillator, and we'll put that up 1 whole octave. So we'll go semitones plus 12, and I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Just so we're getting that second octave there as well of the bass. So we have our D here, our D here, and then you have the A here, which is going to be the harmonic content from the triangle wave. And that looks like an F or a G here, maybe F sharp. So that triangle wave is adding harmonics. It's adding extra sine waves, which is going to make it sound more rich and have a better, it'll sound better coming through speakers. You'll be able to hear it on like phone speakers and smaller speakers without sub. It just kind of gives us a little bit more for the ear to hear. That rhymed, unintentional. Okay, let's move on to the actual bass line. So I'll have my kick playing. So just make a mid clip here, go down to D, And sometimes with these bass lines, they have like longer sustained notes. Sometimes it's more staccato. The bass line I'm gonna have is a little bit of both. So I'm gonna have a little bit of staccato, a little bit of break in the bass notes, and then a long note. And because of that, I wanna make sure that I'm definitely side chaining quite a bit to the kick with the bass, so that the bass with my kick, so that my kick really punches through the sub bass and we're not having conflicting frequencies. So let's just take a listen to this right now. Cool, and let's bring it down an octave or two. I might take this note out. We're gonna see how it affects the energy. When you put a note here, not specifically just this spot, but when you put a note that kind of accents that rolling feel, it kind of adds a bit of energy to the track and it kind of brings it forward. So it's kind of like a more rolling forward motion, a little bit more pressure into the next one. And sometimes that encourages a little bit too much energy into the track. So I might take that out. We'll see how it goes. And then without. Let's do that. Cool. So we have just the one there. And I just want to make sure that it's just getting a lot of that sub bass. I'm going to turn down the higher octave just a little bit more. And then, of course, we're going to use sidechain compression. So I'm going to grab my compressor, throw that on, and sidechain from the kick. And that's just fine like that. Really squash that bass for that kick. Let's go. That's also why we want a nice punchy kick, so they can punch over that bass. Next what I'm gonna do is, where it says bass here, I'm just gonna add actually a tom. So I'm going to change this to a drum rack. And I'm going to grab a tom. That actually sounds kind of interesting. Something like this, something that's a little bit distorted. I'm gonna drag and drop that into the drum rack. And the idea behind this is it's not really gonna be a bass per se. It's gonna kind of be like an accent to the bass. It's gonna give it a bit more groove. So I'm going to EQ out a lot of that high end. I don't really want that to be super, super distorted like it is. I'm gonna filter out the high end and we're gonna draw out a MIDI clip again, this time to kind of accent the bass line. Let's try this. Let's go to 16ths. Let's try that with the bass line. We gotta make sure that we're in the right key. So we're gonna grab a tuner, throw it on there. Sometimes the tuner doesn't work very well. Also, I wanna filter out a lot of that low end. I don't want the bass of this. I just kind of want the, there we go, that like hitting noise. Okay, and I want to fade out a little bit of the tail end because it sounds a little bit too long. Let's listen again. Let's see. Let's duplicate that. And we'll filter out a little bit harsher on the 8. Next, let's move on to our hi-hat. So hi-hat 1, I call this the fill space, and that is going to be the offbeat hat, and it's going to just fill up a lot of that high end of the sound. It's going to fill a lot of the space of the track. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll grab my hi-hat, and we're gonna put that inside of a drum rack. So I guess I gotta grab the drum rack first, drag and drop it on, and go to here. Try out our MIDI track. Okay, so we have our hi-hat there. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to grab a vocoder. And this is gonna give you that high-end tail that we want to kind of fill up that space. The hat itself isn't too long. It's short and punchy. And what I'm gonna do is put the vocoder, I'm gonna filter out a lot of the low end. I'm gonna have just the high bands really pushing up here. And I have the dry wet at 100%. And listen to what this does. Okay, so it's really scratchy sounding, and then you can increase the release. So I'm going to increase it until it's a little bit longer. Now it's going to fill up that high end of the space. Maybe I'll fade in just a little bit. It's less punchy. I'm going to compress this. And the reason I compress this is to make it even less punchy. And it sounds counterintuitive because usually you want your drums to be more punchy, but when they're less punchy like this, it kind of fills up the space without making it have to be so loud to fill up with the tail end. So the tail end is going to be compressed. It's going to be just as loud, or at least a little bit closer to just as loud as the initial hit. So you can turn it all up. It's going to be more of like a longer section of hi-hat. And then last, of course, I want to EQ, tighten everything up. I'm just gonna add like this little accented hat to add just a little bit of swing to the hi-hats as well. So I'm gonna go inside here and grab hi-hat 2. Drag and drop that into my drum rack. And then this is good for adding a little bit of variation to the track because we want to be using a lot of percussion, a lot of subtle things that are going to make it sound more interesting. Go, yeah, 16th. And we're going to turn that right down. I want to make sure that I'm only adding the vocoder onto, both these effects, the compressor and the vocoder. I want to make sure I'm only adding that onto the first hi-hat because I want the second hi-hat to be dry. I'm going to fade this one in a little bit as well to take away some of the punchiness, and I'm going to turn the volume down. So I'm going to open up my chains and turn that down. And you can hear how it's adding that little bit of groove. Let me turn up a little bit more. Cool. And now let's go into the hat 2, which is the punchier hat. And this is going to be the hat that gives you that punch that we kind of took away from the open hat. We're going to have the same hat, the hat 2. Drag and drop that in. And then we're going to put that on the offbeats. Nice and simple. Grab an EQ. Okay, moving on to shaker 1. So this is where it's going to start to get a lot more groovy and interesting. So I'm going to grab this shaker loop that I used. This is actually a shaker loop from the Production Music Live sample pack. So those are really, really good progressive deep house sample packs. And I'm just going to drag and drop that onto the shaker loop area here. So make it a little bit shorter. And this is a really groovy shaker loop. Definitely grab yourself some good shaker loops because they are definitely great for adding a lot of value to your tracks in terms of making them subconsciously groovy. That's why I have it here titled Organic Groove, because it sounds very organic. It sounds realistic. It's going to make the listener feel like it's a little bit more realistic and interesting subconsciously. Go back to the fill space hat. I want to actually add a has effect to that, something I forgot to do. So this is just a stereo delay. I'm going to drag and drop that onto, I can add it to both hats actually. It's going to have 0 feedback, 100% dry wet, and I'm going to change this from sync all the way down to 0 and turn this off so that we can interact with these separately. And I'm going to put this up to about 10 milliseconds. Maybe a little bit longer. That's just creating a stereo delay between your headphones or your speakers. So the left signal plays and then the right signal plays 15 or 16 milliseconds later, depending on this. And if you go anywhere between 7 and 30 or 40 milliseconds, your brain's going to interpret that as one sound and it's going to sound very wide. If you go any further than that, then it can start to sound like 2 sounds. And if you go any less, it can cause bad phase cancellation issues, even with higher end sounds. Go ahead to the next sound. We have our digital groove. So the reason I called it digital groove is because I'm going to be doing it digitally, not using a sample that is more organic sounding. Let's go ahead and grab our shaker 1. Drag and drop that in. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to cut out the first bit like this. So I don't want the transient of that hi-hat to be so punchy. I want it to be more of a soft attack. And I'm also going to fade it in a little bit, so it's more like an actual shaker. I do this for a lot of my tracks, and this is a really good tip to get your own shakers out of samples. You can create the sample or take a hi-hat sample and do this exact same thing, and it's going to be more of a shaker sound, more of a, like an egg shaker or a rattler or something like that. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to filter out some of the high end and the low end. So I don't want that low end, and I don't need all that high end either, because I want it to be more of like a midsection shaker. Listening to the organic groove, it's got a lot of high end. So I kind of want to focus on the mid section with this other shaker. So let's make a MIDI clip. We want 16th notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then to make it even more interesting, I'm going to change the velocity of them. So I'm going to go like this. So it's going to be the first one's going to be the quietest, second one a little bit louder, third one on the offbeat is going to be the loudest, and then back down a little bit. And that's going to make it sound a little bit more humanized, a little bit more interesting to the ear. And I want to add a stereo delay to this one as well. So I'm going to grab my delay. I already have a preset made for this, what I just showed you in the last hi-hat. And let's listen again. Make it nice and wide. Cool. And now we have both shakers together. But we're going to do even more shakers, because the more shakers that you get with this, the more organic and authentic it can sound, as long as you're not overdoing it. I know that sounds kind of counterproductive, but if you can get a decent amount of shakers in here, it's going to sound really full, and it's going to sound really pleasing to the ear if you do it right. So don't overdo it, but adding 1, 2, or 3 shakers is usually a pretty good bet. And yeah, you just kind of want to layer them in a way that they're going to be interesting and working from each other. So they're not doing the exact same thing. Maybe you have one pan from the left to the right, and then the other one pan from the right to the left. You have one that's mostly low end, mostly mid, and mostly high. And by low end, I mean like, you know, pretty high still. But let's go ahead and copy and paste the MIDI track, or sorry, the MIDI clip, and let's change these shakers, and let's grab open hat 1. So I'm actually gonna grab an open hat for this one. And I'm gonna drag and drop it on there. And I'm going to cut out all this empty space here, but I'm also gonna do the same thing where I was doing before, but cutting out that area, fading it in, and let's listen to it. Turn it down a little bit. Let's throw an auto pan on there to make it even more interesting to the ear. Let's listen all together. Cool, interesting. Next, let's get into our, I'm going to EQ this first. I want to take out some of that low end. Next, we're going to go into the claps. This is going to make it interesting because now we can add a clap on the offbeats. But I want to make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to grab 2 different claps with 2 different tail ends. So I'm going to have this clap here and this clap. So I have 1 and 2. So they're a little bit different, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fade out the tail end of them. I'm going to open up my chains. I'm going to duplicate hat 18. And what I'm going to do is create MIDI information here, so I have the claps on the offbeat, chains in the ins and outs here. I'm going to change this to a different note here. Doesn't matter which one. And now I have 3 claps, so I have 2 of the same here. I'm going to change this second note to here and this one to here. I'm also going to offset them slightly. Set it a little bit more interesting, a little bit different. This one a little bit different, and that one's already maybe a little bit forward. And again, that's going to make it more humanized, more organic sounding, and we are making organic house. So, okay, and then the main reason I duplicated this is now I can change them slightly. So I have my first clap, which is this one. That one's going to be just faded out pretty quickly. Nice and punchy. The second one is going to have a longer tail. So it's still going to be cut down a little bit with a little bit of a fade out. And then the third one, I'm also going to fade out to be nice and punchy. So this is going to have, I'm just going to put longer tail. And then when we play this, I'm going to switch actually the MIDI for this. So I'm going to bring this one down and bring these notes up. And then we can take a listen. So it's just a little bit of variation that's going to make it sound even more organic, more authentic, a little bit different, and really subconsciously interesting. we're gonna go on to our percussive elements. So I know that we are doing a lot of drums here, but I can't stress enough how important it is to focus on the percussive elements of organic and deep house. It's such a huge quality in proper use of percussive elements in these tracks. It can really make or break a track. It can elevate it very, very high. So next we have our perks, create a MIDI, grab my percussive element, this one here. Okay, so let's have maybe like a little off, little kind of carrying perk here. Maybe something like this. So I'm going to add a second percussive element, but I'm going to actually make these loops a little bit longer. So I'm going to have this not repeat every time. And that's just going to make it even a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic, I guess. Next, we're going to move on to the tom. So I'm going to grab my tom drum here, drag and drop it in the drum rack. And this is going to be giving a little bit of melodic tone to this as well. So I'm going to push this up 8 semitones because I know that is the key that I want to be in. We can check with our tuner. Track is in D. So this is going to be 3 semitones up to an F. Make our MIDI track here, and let's add some toms to this. Okay, I'm going to turn on the main hat here. It's actually taking up too much of that high end. I'm going to turn off this bass. I don't really like this the way that it sounds. And let's move on to the last percussive element. So I'm going to take a clap, and I'm going to just drag and drop it in. There doesn't even matter what kind of clap, as long as it's... That's actually a pretty good example of what I want to do. And I have this filter on, and we can listen to what it sounds like without the filter. And what I'm going to do is just turn the filter on with some LFO. I have about 6 on the LFO here. It's a pretty slow rate, and it's a sine wave. And what it's going to do is just kind of filter out that high end and open and close it really slow, oscillate it back and forth and opening and closing it. And it's going to make kind of a resonant kind of wafting snare in the background of the track. Let's go to the 16ths. And let's try that, and we'll keep this pretty quiet. Just adds a little bit extra flavor to the percussive elements. Okay, finally moving on to the synths. I know we're pretty far into this video already, but let's just dive into the synths. This is actually my vocal that I just literally said the word O. And then I just recorded it, added a bit of some EQing onto it, and just transposed it up, I believe. Or no, I transposed it down 7 semitones. And it's just adding a little bit of a vocal element to it. It's just kind of a cool sound, not even a vocal, just a cool little blip sound that I added. Then I have this small loop that I did too. So this is going to be this like little melodic loop. So it's very important to add these atmospheric organic elements to these tracks as well, because they're going to be adding a non-digital feeling, because when we're writing this music, it doesn't feel as digital as some other genres. So the way that I made this loop is I just took a preset. I believe it was the simplest piano here. You can just take a listen. It's got a ton of delay and reverb on it. There's a delay reverb plugin here, ROM. So you can hear that it just adding a lot of wet effect to that makes it sound really, really nice and like floaty. So what I did is just kind of wrote a melody line. And then I just recorded it, and then I added it to the loop. And listen how much value this adds. Right? It adds such an amount of depth just adding a couple plucks on those downbeats. Let's make a quick pad here. I'm going to make this in D. Go all the way to the end, and it's just going to be a sawtooth wave. Really simple pad. Initiate a preset. With our pad, we want to have slow attack. At least a little bit. Quite a bit of release. Sawtooth, we want unison. Detune up quite a bit. We can turn the blend up a bit so that the sides are a little bit louder than the center. Filtering on. Second oscillator, maybe pitch that up, volume down a little bit. And let's change this to a different wave, something a little bit more interesting. Let me keep the same octave. Cool. And now to make the pad a little bit more interesting, we're going to add a couple LFOs maybe a little bit onto the detune, a little bit onto the wavetable position, maybe the panning back and forth. A little bit on the filtering. And then to make the real magic, we add some hyperdimension, some chorus, and some reverb. Very basic. And we need to add a bit more harmonic content with this. Lower the octave there. Cool, now we have a pad. Let's move on to another pad. So this is where you're going to make your own judgment call. So I have Pigments, and it's so great. It has so many great presets. I definitely don't think that you shouldn't use presets. I think they're great for this day and age in electronic music. Everyone's using presets at least a couple times in some of their tracks. It just gives you ideas, and honestly, there's some amazing sound design that a lot of producers would never be able to think of. It's just some amazing presets, and I suggest grabbing them and making them your own. Tweak some things, make it a little bit more suited to your style. But anyways, I have Pigments. I grabbed this Ancient Beings preset. I don't remember if I tweaked it. I might have. I'm going to freeze it and flatten it so you can actually have the pad as well in the download of the sample pack. But I'm going to just copy the preset, the MIDI track over, and let's take a listen. Sounds great. I'm going to also add my EQing that I had before and more reverb. It's very organic sounding, very authentic. Brings the track a little bit more to a human feel. Just wanted to interrupt the video for a second. I do want to let you know that I am offering now online coaching via video call. I have one-on-one video sessions that we can book, but there's also monthly personal coaching packages available as well. These packages are for serious producers that are looking to fast track their success. We'll work together on figuring out what it is that you need to work on, what skills you need to improve to become a much better producer much faster. We'll listen to your music, we'll dive into your DAW via the video chats, and we'll talk through email back and forth, and we'll really dissect where you need to improve so that you can improve much quicker. If you're interested in the monthly coaching packages or the video calls, then check the description for a link to that website. All right, back to the video. Okay, and altogether, this is what we have so far. Sounds pretty good, but we need a melody. We need something that is going to elevate this track even more, to make it even more interesting and more exciting. And that I'm going to use Complete Control for. So Complete is what I got when I purchased my Complete A25 keyboard, and it just has a bunch of different presets in it as well. And this one sounds really cool. It's got the synth harp. If you have a sampler, I would suggest using like a sampler like Contact, which has real instruments, African instruments, and different stuff. You can get these really, really cool, authentic sounds. But for this, I'm going to use a synth. I'm going to use a massive preset inside here, and let's just take a listen to what it sounds like. Really, really cool. I'm going to duplicate everything over a few times so we have a longer track to work with, but I don't want to duplicate these. I'm going to just cut these out for now and grab everything up here and duplicate it. Sure, we'll go to here. And then I'll press paste and we'll paste those back in. Just want to show you what these sound like. They're just some sounds, just some resampling. So I just was playing around with some sounds and I just turned resample on inside of here. Hit record, press play, record, play whatever on some different drums and things, and just got those sounds and added some reverb and delay. And it just gets some really cool sounds. Great about a MIDI keyboard and some of the presets that you can use and some of the synths you can use is there's velocity tracking. So depending on how hard you actually hit the keyboard, if you hit it lighter or harder, it's going to create different sounds. It's going to do different things inside of the sound. Maybe it opens up the filter cutoff. Maybe it changes the wavetable position, different things. So when we record, we can make it sound really alive and really organic because we are actually recording different amounts. And it's almost like we're automating as we're playing. So let's go ahead and hit record and just play a little loop here. I liked everything I recorded up until that last note there. So I'm just going to turn that off and let's play that again and I'll keep recording. Okay, so I'll get rid of that and I'm going to quantize this a little bit, maybe about like 90%. I don't want it exact, right? I want it to sound a little bit authentic and raw. So I don't want to quantize it directly to the grid. Giving it a little bit of wiggle room will make it sound more realistic. And let's just duplicate that. And I can go in and change some of these velocity settings as well so that it sounds different. Or I can grab a velocity MIDI effect and drag and drop it in there. And now, if I put on random, it's going to just slightly change the velocity amounts of those notes by however much you put in here. So now every note is going to be just a little bit different. Even though it's repeating, it'll be a little bit different every time. Cool, so I like how it sounds so far. I want to see if I can make this a little bit less aggressive sounding. Okay, so it looks like it's got a bit of this position change, phase, and ring modulation on there. So I'm going to turn the ring modulation down. It looks like it's pretty high. Okay, so it looks like it's the phase that's causing this. So I'm just going to reduce the phase inside the modulation oscillator. Okay, we can take a listen again, and I want to attenuate that last note a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna grab a reverb, throw that on there with quite a long decay time, and there is some delay on here, but I'm gonna increase it. So it's sounding really good so far, but a lot of these tracks have counter melodies or sub melodies. So this is gonna be the last thing that I add into this, and it's going to be just another synth here. Let's grab maybe a Serum and drag and drop that in, and let's find like a nice siny sound. So maybe I'll just make it really quickly. Let's keep the sawtooth, so I'll just reinitiate that. So simple sound, some detune. Pan modulation, LFO on the detune a little bit, and turn on oscillator B. Yeah, that'll work. Filter. Put a high filter on there. And we're gonna make a pluck. It's gonna be a short decay, long release. And you'll see why in a sec. Long release on the amplitude as well. Long. And a second envelope to make it just a little bit punchy. So I have this first envelope opening up the cutoff filter, and then the second one is just going to open up the very, very tip of that filter. So it's going to open it up for like a really split second. So it's a little bit punchy. This might be too resonant. Let me grab a sine wave, like basic shape, sine wave. Octave up. Level this down and sine wave up. Okay, and a ton of let's put a little bit of chorus actually, and then a ton of reverb and delay on there. Okay, so let's hit record and just wing something again. Cool, so I like the first little bit there. So I'm just going to copy that over. And now we have a second melody. If I could just find the last note, get rid of that. With this style, there is a lot you can do with it. You can put in elements and remove elements just to make it interesting. The main bulk and the main ideas behind the track are really having that really solid loop. A loop that you can listen to for 5 minutes, 6 minutes straight and not get bored, because it's just such a high quality. It has so much organic feel to it, so much subconscious interest going on. And there's just such a level of complexity to it that you don't even get bored listening to it. And that's the beauty of this style. And that's the beauty of a lot of styles of electronic music. So one last thing we're going to do before we listen to the final product is I'm going to change the bass line a little bit, and we're going to just change it so it's a couple different notes, because they like to, a lot of the times in tracks they do this. It's going to elevate the track just a little bit more, and then we're going to have one final playback with the second lead being introduced. And maybe I'll filter in this lead. So let's go ahead and grab a filter, automation, and just very quickly over the course of maybe a couple bars there, change that bass line. Let's change it only on the second one here. So let's do this. and add just a little bit more saturation to that bass line because we didn't really add a second layer onto that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of saturation, just maybe 3 decibels, and let's take a listen. Just add in a tiny bit of white noise here. And the way I do my white noise is I add a utility and turn up the volume of it. So I have a utility controlling the volume and white noise playing through an operator. One last thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to put a reverb onto the last lead, and I'm going to automate the dry wet. So I'm going to have my dry wet all the way to 100%, and I'm going to bring it down so it's a bit more dry, and that's going to kind of fade in the original sound. Okay, and I'm going to very quickly remove some elements and just kind of bring them in to make the track more interesting. Okay, so in a lot of like Volen Sentir tracks, a lot of progressive house and deep house tracks, they have these things where they kind of just introduce these elements, these samples just throughout the track, and it just really glues it together and adds that atmosphere. So I'm going to show you a really quick way that you can do that, and it's just kind of the same idea before as grabbing presets and different pad sounds. I'm just going to insert a Pigments because they have really, really nice pad sounds, and then just cranking up the reverb and delay on this. Let's grab a lot of reverb. Take the compressor off, we don't need that. And put a long decay time on there. And let's just play the track and play a few notes while recording in another audio track. So an audio track here, put the routing from the Pigments and click record. Arm the Pigments. I'm just gonna cycle through different presets as this is playing. Make sure that's recording, and it is perfect. Go to the next preset. And we'll do one more. Oh, that last note was sour. That was not my fault. That was the sequencer's fault. So maybe we'll just fade that one out. Cool, and now we can just chop this up. We can split this here. We can split this one here. And split this one here. And now, throughout the track, you have these different sounds that you can work with. And we can get rid of this Pigments unless we want to use it later. And let's spread these out a little bit further. Hopefully they all sound good on their own. Let's put these like atmospheres. And that's really it. It's just adding a lot of these different elements to make it sound cohesive and glued together while maintaining interest, so you can repeat the same loop over and over again, but add little details like these pads and these melodies that are interesting to keep the track pushing forward and to keep people engaged and listening. So let's go ahead and have one final playback. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and let's enjoy. Bring the element back here now. to filter out some of that low end in the bass there. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. If you like this video, make sure to give me a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't already yet, please consider subscribing. It helps me tremendously, and you'll get tons more content like this because, let's be honest, it's great, isn't it? I think so. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.